You guys, welcome back to Rev University. We have a really special guest with us here today, and he is phenomenal. You guys are in for such a treat. Daniel Harmon co-founded Harmon Brothers, given, the Provo-based ad agency behind viral ads like Squatty Potty, Purple, Chatbooks, FiberFix, VidAngel, Poopery, Camp Chef, Loom Deodorant, and Save the Storks. Serving as the chief creative officer, Daniel's creative direction led the agency's groundbreaking ads to collectively generate more than, wait for it, 1.5 billion with a B views and over $500 million in sales. Daniel is also the creator of the Tuttle Twins TV show, which set a record as the #1 crowd-funded kids show in history, raising $3.7 million. Tuttle Twins teaches kids about principles of freedom and economics with a fun mix of comedy and adventure. Daniel also co-founded VidAngel and Angel Studios. He graduated from BYU with a degree in advertising and is married. And if you think all of those things are impressive, he also has 7 children. So give it up for Daniel Harmon. Talk to us about the beginning of Harmon Brothers. How did the agency start, and are there really brothers?
Yes, there are really brothers. At the beginning, my brothers were co-founders of a company called Orabrush, and it was a tongue cleaner to help cure bad breath. And they used YouTube. I should say we used YouTube. I worked there as well to propel Orabrush into stores like Walmart and CVS and Walgreens and all over the world. And it was the first product to use advertising on YouTube. This is the very early days, right? When it was, only cat videos and everything was poor quality and all that stuff. But they introduced the advertising platform, and my brother Jeffrey recognized that was going to be something of the future, jumped on it, and was buying up ads like crazy. And they kind of cracked the code on being able to buy an ad, spend $1 in advertising, and get more than $1 back in revenue through online sales. And then there was an umbrella effect as well of everybody being exposed to Orabrush, and then the demand started to come in for distribution inside of stores and things. And so that got a little company called Poopery to notice what Orabrush was doing, and they reached out to my brothers and said, "Hey, can you come do the same thing there?" And so we ended up resigning from Orabrush to go and do the Poopery campaign. It's the one with the girl that opens up the stall and says a bunch of terrible bathroom things in a British accent, which you can get away with. So anyway, it was the intention at the time was to go and actually work at Poopery in the same way we had been kind of an in-house marketing team at Orabrush. And so when Harmon Brothers was formed, it was the kind of thing, okay, we've got to start this. And my brothers were kind of having a conversation of okay, we've got to have a place to put this money for the campaign. What are we going to do? And they were like, well, let's just call it Harmon Brothers. This is creating a business entity at probably 2 o'clock in the morning or something. And what are we going to call it? We're going to call it Harmon Brothers, and we'll change it later if we need to. And the intent wasn't actually to create an ad agency at all. It was just to create a financial vessel for the Poopery campaign. But the Poopery campaign blew up, started getting featured on places like Ad Age and Huffington Post and media all over the place, and they were citing creative agency Harmon Brothers, and we're all sitting around my brother's kitchen table and looking across at each other like, are we an ad agency? I guess we're kind of it was like we didn't know that we were starting an ad agency at that time. And then one of the other co-founders of Harmon Brothers, Benton Crane, who was our CEO for I think 8 or 9 years, he kind of had that vision of we can make this into an ad agency. And so the success of the Poopery campaign blew up, got our name all over the place. And it became clear over time that a partnership with them long term wasn't going to work out, wasn't going to be something that either of us really wanted. And then for a time, we were just kind of struggling to put food on the table and kind of figure out this advertising and marketing for services company. And this will help other people, a lot of people look at Harmon Brothers we're overnight success and all that kind of stuff. No, we drained our savings accounts in order to like survive, because we weren't able to close deals. We didn't have our business model really figured out. We didn't know how to package things up for the client in a way that made any kind of sense to them. And so we were just dwindling our savings down to the nothings. Benton, who I mentioned before, our former CEO, he was driving Uber. He was one of the first 5 Uber drivers in Provo, Utah. And he was working construction on the side, like landscaping. I was doing design work and copywriting on the side. And we were just trying to make ends meet. And then along came a company called Squatty Potty. And Squatty Potty kind of changed our fortunes, where we were able to sign a big enough contract that we could put food on the table, and where they blew up in a way that, like, was even beyond what we'd seen with Poopery, beyond what we'd seen with Aura Brush. And that's where we kind of really started to hit our stride. And then Purple, and in fact, before Squatty Potty launched, we were actually working with Purple prior to that as well. And I remember actually showing Tony and Terry an early cut of the Squatty Potty video of like, oh, check this out, and they're laughing and everything, and like, wow, what's this pooping unicorn thing? Are we gonna get that? I'm like, no, it's not gonna be that. But anyway, so anyway, it was quite the ride, and it was so funny because after Poopery, immediately afterwards, we did the video with the piano guys and Peter Hollins and David Archuleta. It was this nativity video, and the Mormon Tabernacle Choir was in it and everything, and we did it at cost. And so we partnered with Bonneville Communications and Jeff, oh gosh, I'm forgetting his last name. I think Jeff Rust is his last name, and the Radiant Foundation, and we did this big video, and it was very viral, and it blew up at Christmas time. And because we were doing it for no profits, we thought, God's going to take care of us. And so we got that video out, and we're like, okay, the clients are just going to come now, And that was exactly when all our savings accounts went to zero. So it was a really interesting time of how kind of you set up these expectations in your head of how things are going to go, and just sometimes it doesn't work out that way, but it worked out in the end. So.
Well, I'm glad it worked out. You guys are clearly pioneers in the advertising space. I mean, starting on YouTube as early as you did, and now you've pioneered a new style of advertising that's very pitch style, it's very comedic, it's very fast-paced, but it's very long-form content. Mm-hmm. Talk to us about how you came up with that new strategy of advertising and why it works.
I think a lot of it had its roots in the early days of YouTube. So there were that was when the vlogging onset came with people like iJustine back in the day, and Shay Carl and his family, and there was gosh, I'm forgetting some of the names, but even I think like Rhett and Link were doing some vlog style videos. There was a lot of that kind of stuff, the Vlog Brothers, and that was influential to the Aura Brush video that we did at the time. And also, I think it was informed by our background in door-to-door sales. So my brother and I had done door-to-door sales, selling potatoes. We grew up on an Idaho potato farm, and we would bring loads of potatoes down from that farm in the 50-pound boxes. I guess that's a pretty popular fundraising method now. So we were the ones that actually pioneered that as well, I think, to some degree, because we would just bring down these 50-pound boxes of potatoes, and we'd just sell them door to door for $20 a box, and they were fresh, and it was going to be better than what you could get in your grocery store. They actually still had the dirt on them and everything, so they would last longer for bigger Utah families and stuff. And we were making more money than what we would have been making had we been working just like some kind of a minimum wage job. And we're having some success with that. But so we learned some door-to-door sales that way, both raising money for like college funds and mission funds. And then we, afterwards, like in college, we actually went and sold alarm systems door-to-door, with an ADT authorized dealer. And we were some of the top sales reps in the company, and learned a lot about sort of building up the value of a product, especially one that was as expensive as a home security system, and overcoming objections, and being able to catch people's attention quickly, and being able to relate with a customer, and set up the problem and provide an elegant solution and close the deal. And so both of those things, I think, really informed the style. to begin with, of that sort of pitch person style. And then YouTube was, always kind of a place for comedy. And so we just wanted to integrate that as part of it. We hated dull ads, and we wanted ads that we would enjoy as well. And so that's what we set out to create.
Dirty potatoes and pooping unicorns. Fantastic. You are clearly a creative genius. And if you guys don't know, he was the creative director behind the very popular ads that we know. You've mentioned a few: Poopery, Purple, Squatty Potty. And those are the ads we know and love, and that have personally made me cry laughing. So what is your creative process? How do you consistently land on this pot of gold, per se, every time?
For us, it starts with experiencing the product ourselves and falling in love with it ourselves. So using Poopery and being like, oh, this is actually really effective. This is great for, stopping the stench in the bathroom. Like, my wife approves of this. This is awesome. And so it was really easy to think of ways to kind of come up with how to sell that. The Squatty Potty, using it for the first time, like sitting in the squatting position while pooping. And if you haven't done it yet, it's time to convert, because I'm telling you, it's healthier, it's better, it's faster, it's all those things. And so,
TMI, but I testify. Okay.
That's right. It's like a third of the world that I think that just squats. Like they have squatting toilets, it's a better way to go.
In other countries.
Squatty Potty is actually just kind of a hack for us, Westerners. Let's see. Then, so you kind of start with what sells you, and then that is kind of the central message that you're going to take across, of like, okay, this is why I'm sold. If it sells me this way, if any of you have read the book, The User Method, if you haven't read it, I ask you to read it. It's a really good book. It basically says how a lot of really great innovations and entrepreneurship and inventions have come from people just trying to solve a problem for themselves. And so when you do that, when you solve a problem for yourself, it ends up being an extension. You end up being an extension of a wider audience that exists in the world. And that was the case for these products. So we would get really sold on them. And like a purple, I sleep on a purple mattress to this day. It was so much more of a comfortable bed than whatever, silly piece of garbage that I got from, a wedding gift or whatever it was. But when you do that and you experience it, and you're like, okay, this is how we get to the root of this message and sell it. And so we were just selling ourselves first and foremost. And then we would kind of test that out on other people. And we really knew we were onto something when we would read a script to somebody, or we would show them an early edit of a video, and they would ask buyer intent questions of like, what's the website for this? Or they'd be like, how much does this cost? Or they'd be like, where do you get these? Is this available in store? Or like, how can I get one? Like, even sometimes more directly, it's like, oh, we're on to something. This is going to work. It's resonating. People want this. And then obviously the proof is more in the actual, launch of the campaign.
Yeah. And a big part of the campaigns that you guys run rests heavily on the character development, obviously, of your pitch person or your spokesperson, right, for the ad. Yep. So what do you guys do to refine your character descriptions and fully develop these characters?
So a couple of things, a couple of sort of guiding principles that we use for the characters in our ads is they need to be relatable in some way, where the audience can be like, oh, that's me, or I get kind of what they're speaking to. A really good example of that is the Chatbooks mom, right? Very relatable for moms of like, oh, my life is out of control. I'm barely hanging it together by a thread. I don't have time to do all the scrapbooking and stuff, and so I just need something that takes care of it for me. So that was a very relatable thing. Another thing is to have some sort of aspiration to it of like, oh, this is more of what I want to be, this is kind of elevating it a little bit, right? And that was a little bit of the idea behind the British accent with Poopery, and the Prince with Squatty Potty was kind of elevating that conversation a little bit more. The unicorn was actually the relatable character where you were seeing the squatting back and forth and the unkinking of the colon. It's just going to continue, guys. This has been my life, so we're just going to share openly here. But but that sort of aspirational element is something we would want to bake in. So in the case of like Fiber Fix, it's having that really tough, manly guy that would just, could go and fix anything. That was something that was both like a relatable sort of desire and aspirational thing for people. So those are kind of the two main principles for it. And then I think at the end of the day, I think a big part of it is the cadence in which the person speaks. So if you watch or listen to any kind of podcasts or talk radio, the most popular ones, they have a very specific cadence where they come down on their sentences. And what I mean by that is they fall off and they sound very convinced of what they're saying. You see how I did that? Convinced of what they're saying. That you kind of fall off on the sentence. So if you think of it in terms of like sports talk radio or political talk radio, any of them, they all have one thing in common. No matter what they're doing, they all sound like they totally believe what they're talking about. And that is some of what we integrated into our characters, and we would actually have the actors experience the product and fall in love with it and everything, but it was very much getting across that sort of sincerity of like, I believe what I'm saying in the same way that we would believe in the product or service that we were selling. So
that's a good tip. So anyone who has a podcast, if you didn't hear it, you can rewatch this interview later on RevRoad's YouTube channel, because that's a really great tip. I want to switch gears a little bit to Angel Studios. You're also a co-founder there. Talk to me about what your experience and your learnings taught you at Harmon Brothers that has reflected over into your work at Angel Studios.
Oh boy. So Angel Studios started out with VidAngel, right? That was the co-founding there. And essentially, as the history goes, at the same time as we were starting the Poopery campaign, we had already started the beginnings of VidAngel. So my brother had sat down and coded the first version of a product that would either skip or mute portions of the content that you were watching on YouTube that you would find objectionable. And so that's actually where it started out, was on the YouTube platform and with like Google Play rentals and those kinds of things. And then, fast forward and VidAngel ended up getting, sued by Disney. Well, I'm not going to fast forward that far. But essentially, Harmon Brothers at the time when we were struggling, like we were kind of building both companies at the same time. Because experience had shown if you start a venture of some kind, the likelihood of it succeeding is less it's less likely that it'll succeed than that it'll actually fail, right? That's just the kind of the numbers when it comes to entrepreneurship and starting a new business. And so we were building out VidAngel at the same time as we were building out Harmon Brothers, and they both took off at once. So myself and Benton, we focused on the agency, and then my brothers Neil and Jeffrey focused on VidAngel. Then fast forward, it gets sued by Disney. That lawsuit ends up in in there being a judgment that comes down. It's a giant copyright judgment. And then later on in the pandemic, Disney decided to settle. And so at that point, along that path, they had started the properties like The Chosen, the crowdfunding for The Chosen, and Dry Bar Comedy. And those took a lot of upfront investment, obviously, to be able to make those work. And then eventually it became obvious that the companies needed the original content side of the company, Angel Studios, needed to separate from the filtering side of the company, VidAngel. And those two ended up becoming two separate businesses, and they are to this day. VidAngel's still available out there for your Netflix, your Amazon, your HBO, all that kind of stuff. I still use it as well. Yep, me too. And then Angel is now focused on the original content, and specifically original content that is validated through the wisdom of crowds. And I believe there's a book that's called The Wisdom of Crowds, right? Okay, I haven't read it yet, but my brothers say it's great. But essentially it comes from the idea of a guy at a carnival clear back in the day. I can't remember if it was a carnival or a fair, but he had this big prized cow. It was a livestock. I'm not sure if it was a cow, whatever it was. It was a big animal that he was having everybody guess on how much did this cow weigh. And you'd have really knowledgeable people come in and put in their guesses, and just complete, like, kids or whoever it was, just come in and throw in their guesses. And they found out that any expert would not really come close to guessing what the cow's weight was. But when they took the hundreds of people that had guessed on it and aggregated that into a single, a single group and, averaged it out, they were within like a pound or two of this cow. That was like, and just the odds of that happening are like, it's unbelievable, right? And so there's this idea of the wisdom of crowds, of crowds being able to really validate and get to a wiser choice than necessarily experts can. And so that's what Angel Studios is doing with the crowdfunding for projects like The Chosen, where they had over, I think it was like 19,000 people that invested in the show itself. And then now it's been seen by, I guess, over 100 million people around the world. The view count on it, I think, is over 400 million in and of itself. And so, yeah, it's a really kind of cool thing.
So Angel Studios is phenomenal to me. The amount of awards and record-breaking crowdfunding campaigns you guys have led is jaw-dropping. What are there things that you do consistently? Are there things that you repeat in each campaign that work for you strategically?
Yes. So you really have to get to the heart of what this particular media project is offering that is filling a hole for a specific demographic. So in the case of The Chosen, any kind of good content out there about Jesus, most of it was viewed as either cheesy or just very poor quality, or both, or or just not very sincere and not very relatable. And The Chosen was filling that void, right, of getting to more of an authentic representation of Jesus in a more relatable sort of place more relatable backstory to kind of walk in the shoes of his followers, of those that knew him. And so that was filling that void. In the case of the show I'm doing now, the Tuttle Twins, it's filling a void because it's giving kids a cartoon that teaches them about principles of freedom and economics that are no longer being taught in schools and in culture. So it's filling a very specific void, and that's kind of where they're landing, is in that spot. And in the case of the Wingfeather Saga, which they funded shortly after we funded Tuttle Twins, the show The Wingfeather Saga is built on a book series by Andrew Peterson. It's very much filling the void of fantasy entertainment that the whole family can sit down and watch together, as opposed to kind of a Game of Thrones or The Witcher, or some of these other places where some of the other bigger media projects have gone, where it's been pushing more towards the mature. And this is something you can actually sit down and watch with your kids, more like a Harry Potter or that kind of thing. Sure. Mm-hmm.
What are some of the pros and cons that you've discovered to crowdfunding when it comes to, raising money that way as a business? And what advice do you have for small business owners who might be interested in crowdfunding?
Okay, so I'll start with the pros. Some of them are the same, pros and cons. You get to learn a lot in 30 days, like a ton, because you have a deadline, you launch it, you go out the door, and you are iterating and changing messages and trying new things like crazy for a sprint of somewhere between 30 and 60 days, depending on how you decide to structure your campaign. And we've found that more the 30-day mark is the sweet spot. And so that is a pro. You get to learn a lot about what you're doing very quickly. One of the cons is it's a tremendous amount of stress. It's very much like being in a boiler cooker, like for about 30 days, because you have this high of when you go out the door and all these initial people jump on and they give you funding and stuff. And it's very similar to a Kickstarter or Indiegogo in that way. In the case of Angel Studios, it's actually investing into the project itself and owning shares of it rather than just getting back T-shirts or the product itself. And so there's this big high as you go out the door, and then there's this urgency that comes with the deadline, right? Where people have to get in their final money. And so those are both pros and cons, because there's so much stress that comes with it. But again, it's so great because of the market validation. Not only learning what works in your message, but learning, are there enough people to really support this, or is this smaller than I originally thought? And we've seen from things like The Chosen, that there was a tremendous audience out there that wanted to support it. In the case of Tuttle Twins, the show I'm working on, that was also, we had, I think, about a quarter of our investors they would say things like, "Oh, I don't even care if this makes money back. I just need this to exist for my kids and my grandkids." And that was really cool to see as well. And so we were just like, "Well, then just give us the money and we won't have you invest." No, I'm kidding. I didn't say that. We just thought it was really fun to see how much people believed in the cause. Anyway, so I don't know if that kind of covered the question or not. But
Yeah, no, that's great. What advice do you have for entrepreneurs looking to crowdfund?
Test before you get to your crowdfunding as much as you possibly can. And what I mean by that is I'm a big believer in doing it cheap before you do it expensive. And so test in the way you pitch to somebody. So first off, you're going to see how your sales pitch goes, right? Can you describe your product in 5 to 10 seconds or something along those lines, or you're pitching maybe 30 seconds and it doesn't sell people? And if not, what do you need to adjust? So test on kind of a face-to-face. I would experiment with testing as well, messaging before you go out the door, with ads on, good testing platforms like Facebook, Instagram, Google and the like. And you can also test just with, I wouldn't say viral, but I would just say organic reach as well. If you have social channels and things like that, you can push that out too. Just do as much testing as possible before you go out the door. And then also we were, to my knowledge, back in the days of Orbrush, we were one of the first ones to actually spend behind a crowdfunding campaign. That was a new thing. At the time, it was just all like put it out there, push it to your list, that kind of thing. But we were actually spending ads behind it. And so I would test into those kinds of things, just to kind of see how much you're able to do in that way. But I would also not underestimate the power of video, to be able to sell what you've got going on and really demonstrate your product in a compelling way.
Something that I really admire about the way that you operate is the value that you have for people. And in one of our previous conversations, you said not one person is key.
Yeah.
So how does that look? How does that show up in the way that Harmon Brothers operates?
I think a lot of people look at Harmon Brothers from the outside and say, "Oh, they're a bunch of creative geniuses." And that's flattering, but it's not very accurate. I think it's a bunch of creative hard workers and very committed to doing right by the client and bringing on projects that we care about. And part of that is that there's no one just like creative genius that's running everything. We have a bunch of fail-safes to help ensure the success of the people who are working on it. So, for example, a creative director will have a second creative director that they can go to as a backup, just to kind of gut check themselves on the different decisions, because that's kind of their first line of defense. The second line is we every time we approach a campaign, we're approaching it with multiple writers. In the case of our biggest campaigns, often it's 3 or 4 writers. And so it's coming with multiple ideas. And so if one isn't landing, another one, can work out. Or maybe this was a really great concept over here, but the sales pitch in this one is really good. And we'll take different pieces of that and put that together. And then we have a brain trust. And if you guys are familiar with the story of like Pixar, they have a brain trust inside of their studio. And we were doing this before we knew kind of about the history of Pixar using it, but we have a bunch of really great creative storytellers, directors, writers, editors, producers, who are able to provide feedback at key moments to make sure you don't get too far off course, right? Where you can read your script and they can be like, "Well, that joke's not funny." Or they're just not, they don't even have to tell you the joke's not funny. They just don't laugh. And you're like, "Okay, well, that didn't work." And then also they're saying, "Well, that's not selling me. I'm not feeling compelled to go look up the website or anything." Or you can see those buyer intent questions of like, "How much does this cost?" Or like, "Where do I look this up?" That kind of thing. So we're able to, at all the key junctures of writing, of idea creation, of editing, finishing, we're able to check in with people that are not as close to the project, because once you get in deep enough, it's called, if you guys haven't read the book Made to Stick by Chip and Dan Heath, you need to. It is one of the best marketing books in the world that's not a marketing book. And it talks in there about, well, actually, I might be getting my wires confused a little bit here. I think it's either Made to Stick or Creativity, because one of them talks about how you can get the curse of knowledge, which means you get so close to something you no longer know what it's like to not know what this thing is, and you don't know how to speak to it. You can speak to yourself about it, but can I speak to Bree effectively on it? And so you check in on those moments, and you have people that can come in with fresh eyes and just be like, what's that? And you're like, well, I thought it made sense to me. But then everyone else was like, that doesn't belong there. Get that joke out of there, or get that thing out, and they can help you identify those things. And they might not always help identify the right solutions, but they can at least help you identify the problems, and okay, something here needs to be fixed. Oh, it's getting bored in this part. Got to do something about that to up the pace. Oh, this isn't funny. Oh, this isn't selling people. I've got to come up with more compelling language or a better visual here. Yeah.
So the people who work at Harmon Brothers, it seems like it's a very unique skill set. I mean, they're incredibly creative, but also very marketing and business minded. How do you hire? How do you find the right people for your team?
That's a great question. So we don't think we're very good interviewers. We feel like we need to see people in action. So we don't interview and hire for almost any position, especially the creative ones. We have to contract with somebody first and see how we work with them. And that is the true interview process. Like, how do I actually work with someone for a week or 2 weeks or a month or something like that? And then we get into more of kind of a full-time offer kind of discussion. Because again, some people might interview really well and do all their research and all that kind of thing, but then are they actually going to behave the way they need to? Are they going to work well with people? And we are looking for people that can be candid when they need to be candid, like be very open and honest about when something's not working, but can also get along and be responsible and own up to having made a mistake or a misstep in some way. And so that process for us very much is kind of, try it out a little bit first, kind of dip the toe in the water, date a little bit, and then get married.
And you mentioned to me previously that you often hire comedians first and then teach them marketing.
Yeah.
What is that process like, and how has that worked for you?
It's called look them up on Dry Bar Comedy. No, I'm kidding. No, I mean, that's part of it for me. But seriously, going to stand-up shows, going to sketch comedy shows, just looking for people who are already funny is a better starting place for us than trying to make great marketers and advertisers be comedic. So we think it's easier to train a comedian to be a marketer than a marketer to be a comedian. And that's proven true for us over and over again. It's such a developed skill set of making people laugh, of that comedic timing, of knowing the right amount of, when to shut up, when to carry your sentence on, all those kinds of things. They're not innate skills for everybody. And so people that have the proven skill set in that, it's easier to kind of catch them up to speed on how to advertise and market than it is the other way around.
Interesting. So you've worked with your brothers for quite a while now.
Yep.
Talk to us about the family dynamic of working with family and how you guys have managed to keep your relationship healthy.
Yeah, we happen to have a lot of complementing skill sets. I'm more of kind of a creative storyteller. My brother Jeffrey is more of a visionary and strategist. My brother Neil is more operational and strategic. And I have a brother Theron that's amazing with people and clients. And so there's all these kind of complementing skill sets that we've had, which has been partially key to us being able to work together. And then the other one that's been successful is you just have to get really good at forgiveness. Otherwise, it's not going to work in working with family. You have to be able to say there are more important things in this life than this issue that we're disagreeing on now, or even this business, or even this business's success, and that is relationships. And because those stick around, right? And the businesses can come and go, especially your role in them. And we grew up around family where we saw business get in the way of some family relationships. And we were always, as kids, like, oh, why would you do that? Why would you allow yourself to get so caught up in something that, like, literally you can't talk to this person anymore, or you constantly hold resentment and you can't be the same? And I think we've all just kind of sort of internally made the commitment we're not going to allow the business to ever be more important than the relationship. And that's not to say that we don't have arguments, because we have our bang out like arguments and like but we don't let it sever things. We don't let it canker and get to fester too much. We try to address things candidly, and we try to remember that at the end of the day, the relationship matters more, and we all need love and forgiveness extended to us individually, and so we need to do the same for others.
You've shared some really incredible values, I feel, probably guide a lot of the business and the way that you operate and Harmon Brothers operates, such as forgiveness and selling what you believe in and valuing people. Are there any other values and principles that you consistently reflect back on or return to guide you as you progress forward?
Yeah, one we already touched on, that I think nothing sells better than the truth. So if you can really find the truth of your product or your service and get to the heart of that will sell better than any kind of gimmick or something else, like especially for the long-term brand building of it, right? If you think of the way that Nike does things, for example, very much like speaking to the long-term, they're not out there doing the direct sales as much. But so that's one that's guided us a lot. And then another one is, for me personally, is that I think it's really good to trust and empower people before they're quite ready. I think the really great character people will step up and they'll rise to that occasion. And I've seen that over and over again, because in the early days of Harmon Brothers, I was doing all the creative directing, I was doing all the directing myself, and it got to the point that the demand was enough that I had to replicate myself pretty quickly. And so I brought in other people to be creative directors and directors, and I had to empower and I had to delegate before I even felt ready to do so. But in that process, I just kept saying all the way along the way to them, you've got this, I believe in you, you're going to do a great job. And you kind of have to be, in a leadership position, you kind of almost have to be a little bit of a father figure that way, or father or mother figure, where you just put that trust in them, and the best ones will come out on top, and they'll grow quickly. But I mean, I wasn't ready when we started Harmon Brothers for all the things that we encountered, and so why would that be the case with anybody else? We all have to kind of stretch and grow, and so I think that trust and mentorship needs to revolve around just kind of a little push off before someone's ready, but letting them know that they can do it.
You mentioned that as Harmon Brothers grew, you had to bring on other people, obviously. And now you've kind of stepped out of the day-to-day work at Harmon Brothers. So what does your day-to-day look like now? Where do you spend your time? Where do you spend your focus?
Well, I still advise and consult with some of the leadership at Harmon Brothers, and so it's sitting down and problem solving and thinking through different strategies and things, and working with either people, client issues, all those kinds of things. But my day-to-day is now Tuttle Twins. So it's a TV show, again, that teaches kids about principles of freedom and economics. So it's something near and dear to my heart, something that I would have wanted as a kid. It's based on the best-selling book series by Connor Boyack and Elijah Stanfield that sold over 4 million copies now. So we're just trying to teach kids about principles of rights to life, liberty, and property, free markets, entrepreneurship, inflation, which is a big one right now, the golden rule, some of these timeless principles, free markets, I already mentioned free markets, free speech. And we're doing it in a way it's exciting because kids are understanding it, but adults are understanding it for the first time, where they're like, oh, I've believed this my whole life, but I haven't had the critical thinking skills or it put in this way to really know why I believe that. And there's these conversations happening over the dinner table, and these kids going through the grocery store and being like, milk's up to $5 a gallon. They're like, that's the inflation monster hitting, and or like going through Costco, like this is literally what's happening. Or kids getting inspired to go out and start their own lemonade stands or cookie stands and sell little things and getting really inspired about their own little innovations, or being able to think critically about things like civil disobedience. I mean, like just because something's a law doesn't mean it's moral, right? And we take them back in time, these kids, on an adventure to go and learn from people like Rosa Parks and Harriet Tubman and Susan B. Anthony to kind of learn those critical thinking skills. So anyway, it's a really fun project, and it's animation, which is a lot of fun for me, because before advertising, I actually started out studying animation in school, and it's been a blast.
You are so well-rounded. Tell us, since we're talking about Tuttle Twins, give us some silver linings as we as entrepreneurs are looking at the economy. What opportunities can we be looking for? What do you see from your seat?
I think whenever the economy goes downhill a little bit, companies have to really refocus on the things that are actually making a difference. And because a lot of the time, revenue in certain areas can fall off, or they'll find that some efforts that were working before are no longer working, and it's just a really good time to hone your skills and refocus on what matters. And I think there's also a lot of opportunity whenever the economy goes downhill, because a lot of advertisers pull out. That's one of the first easiest things for people to cut off, is like, oh, let's pull some of the marketing budget, let's pull some of the advertising budget in order to survive. And that might be appropriate in some cases, but that opens up the way for places where the bidding war for ads is a lot less expensive. So that can be a really good opportunity. And I think another sort of silver lining is that some of the greatest innovations have happened. You see them happen right after big economic sort of collapses, where you have some really resilient big companies that kind of come up out of that. And so it's just a time to be really focused on what matters and really be focused on your revenue at the end of the day. So
Thank you so much, Daniel. We are going to open it up for audience questions. So if you have a question, please raise your hand. Fonzie or someone else will run you a microphone. This is so our online audience can hear you. The time is now yours.
Hey there, Daniel.
Hi.
Nice to meet you.
Good to meet you.
I'd like to have a side conversation afterwards, but I have to confess, I was working in an ad agency about 10 years ago. When did Squatty Potty come out?
It was about that. It was maybe 8 years ago, I think. 2015 or 2016. It was one of those.
So I remember where I was sitting when I watched that with my creative team.
We were your Pearl Harbor. Wow.
Yeah, it was pretty funny. I mean, it was mind blowing as a creative team. So it's really nice to kind of hear it behind the scenes. Now I'm in a startup and bringing the advertising background to the table. And so I went from a place where I had big budgets and clients and that whole world, and now we're lean. And I'm blessed to have my old copywriter partner is now my creative director, but we're a two-man marketing team.
Yeah.
So my question to you is kind of about that scalability of, like, how big was your team when Squatty Potty got produced, and how big is your team now, and what were kind of the steps from there to here?
Yeah, so our team at that time was technically, I think, 4 of us at the time of Squatty Potty that were like fully dedicated to it, and we had contracted out a lot of other people to make a production that big. And I think we're closer to 10x of that right now. And what was the second part of the question? Sorry, again.
I guess what took you, or what kind of propelled you, I guess, in steps?
Oh, market demand is what propelled us. So because we had pioneered such a revolutionary kind of advertising style, there was a whole bunch of people that were looking at their product and saying, this is a good product, but it's not very well known. And that's kind of what we were known for, is really blowing up very small companies into household brand names and, helping 10x their revenue. In some cases, help take them to unicorn level status. And so that's what they were approaching us for, was they were seeing, oh, I can be very straightforward in the way I go about selling, but I can do it in a way that I'm building my brand at the same time. Because in the past, it was, if you were going to do direct selling, you had to do it more Billy Mays kind of style. It was a little bit more of the infomercial kind of thing, and it wasn't as interesting. There wasn't this character and comedy and all those kind of things that were brought into it like we had, and we were bringing in much more of the elements of branding, of traditional branding with it. And so the fact that you could get both at once, I think, was what drove a lot of the demand within the industry. And then from there, it was just kind of adding one person after another as we needed to, as we took on more and more clients. Yep, no problem.
All right, quick question here. I'm a big fan of Tuttle Twins, by the way. Me and my kids. We watch all
thank
the
you.
time.
Thanks for watching.
We're looking forward to the next season here.
That's right.
We see a big movement in conservative media taking place right now, right? You see Daily Wire coming out with their programs. You see PragerU's making all these alliances, Epic Times. Like, lots of different groups are kind of coming together trying to provide content, but also, like, there is a movement happening. People are trying to capture it. Where do you see the conservative media movement going, and where does Angel Studios kind of fit into that?
So I think right now we're seeing a lot of shows like ours that are very, very explicitly conservative or freedom-minded, that kind of thing, or very much like, I guess you would call it like either the anti-woke or the conservative or whatever you'd call it, that are out there. And I think we'll see less of that over time. And I think it'll more just morph into storytelling with more universal values that are baked into the story. And I mean, if you look at the early days of Disney, that was very much the case. And it has been for, I would argue, a lot of Disney's successful stuff over the years is stories that let's take one example. Tobey Maguire's Spider-Man, right? With great power comes
Great responsibility.
Yeah, everybody knows that, right? And it's like a core truth that we all kind of adhere to, but there's a really great story built around that. And it was hitting on something that was really true and a good principle. And I think we'll see more of that kind of storytelling happening where it'll get back to principles that are more universally relatable, or like you said, that might be more digestible to a conservative. And I think it'll be less of like, oh, this is a Jesus show. You know, even in the way The Chosen is doing it, it is a Jesus show, but it's doing it in a way that's so much more relatable and so much more human, right, than it's ever been done before. And so I think that's where a lot of the media is going to go. Is just like, can you make a really great story, and you don't have to preach to everybody in kind of a hard way, and like, you know, here I am making a show about freedom and economics that is definitely preaching, and I'm not going to like hide behind that at all. But I think that's a lot more of where that's headed, and I think that's where Angel Studios is going to be very much on the forefront of it. One of their most recent examples is a story called Truth and Conviction. It's about I always forget how to pronounce his name. It's Hugh. I forget. It's an HH something name. Anyway, he was a kid that was speaking out against the Nazi regime before anybody else was. And he was like a 16, 17-year-old. And it was this story of what the power of a youth or a teenager can be to the world, because he inspired like generations, and he was ultimately killed for it. But he was one of these kids that was out there, and he was like putting out these pamphlets against the Nazi regime, and they thought it was some college professor that was doing this. And eventually they caught him, and they killed him for it. But it's just an amazing story that is very inspiring, and that's something our kids, the TikTok generation, needs to see. Of like, I don't have to just sit here and be this. Why couldn't I be that? Why couldn't I do something like that? I think those are the kind of stories that are going to get more and more traction over time.
This has been awesome, by the way. Really cool hearing your story. What's been one of the biggest things that you and your brothers have disagreed? If you had to look back and say, like, what was the biggest disagreement we ever had about the business? What was it?
The biggest disagreement we ever had about the business. In the early days of VidAngel, there were a lot of disagreements. We could tell it wasn't working well enough. And in the early days of Harmon Brothers, we could tell that a lot of our packages weren't tailored well enough to the clients before we kind of nailed down a model. And in both of those cases, before we nailed it, there were a lot of heavy disagreements about how to pivot. Oh, we need to do it this way. We need to do it that way. And like, we all wanted to do the same thing. We all wanted to make a successful business, to tap into something that was going to actually work, and a formula that we could replicate and that kind of thing. But we just had different ways of strategically going about it, because we all have a little bit of the strategic mind in us. And so we would butt heads pretty hard over some of those ways to pivot on VidAngel, some of those ways to pivot on, I'd say even Angel Studios, but on Harmon Brothers for sure. And those were some of the biggest ones. But at the end of the day, we have to recognize we're all trying to accomplish the same thing. We don't need to be offended that someone else is trying to do it a different way. We just need to decide on one and just lock arms and go. So, yep.
As a follow-up to that question, to what you were talking about pivoting, well, what is your suggestion on pivoting? And for a new company, how do you do it well? Because, you know, as a new founder, you have this great business idea. You feel like you figure something out, a pain point that you're trying to solve. But sometimes, you know, when you try to take it to market, it's not as successful. But what are your suggestions on pivoting?
So, yes.
The process of pivoting.
what is the process of pivoting that we use with our team? So first off, recognize that something's not working. So you would, as you chase a strategy, it's best to identify an expectation of what that success will look like. If you're not meeting that, then it's time to think about pivoting, especially depending on how far you are off. It's easy to pivot from something that just falls flat on its face, where there's literally like no adoption, right? No customers are coming in, no clients are saying yes. Well, that's easy to pivot from, right? What's hard to pivot from is something that's kind of working and you're kind of building up a business around. And if you've gotten a little too heavy on your headcount or your expenses and things like that, that gets really hard. So staying lean as long as you can to be able to not run into the innovator's dilemma, to use a popular term, where, oh, if we do this other thing, it's going to upend this other revenue thing we've got. But I mean, how long did it take for the iPhone to replace all the iPod sales, right? That was an innovator's dilemma thing that Steve Jobs got out in front of, and just like, no, we're just going to embrace it. This is going to cannibalize our iPod sales, but we've got to embrace this new thing, the iPhone. That's a very obvious example. But when you pivot, you have to be prepared to buckle up for a time and have it hurt another portion of your business. And that's like to be expected with it. And so another part of the pivoting strategy is do you have enough resources to go multi-pronged? Meaning, can you chase more than one thing at once? Meaning, okay, we think 2 or 3 of these things could work out. Hopefully it's not any more than that. Maybe we chase a couple of those at the same time. So when we're testing a new client partnership model at Harmon Brothers, we're often testing more than one, just to kind of see how that will work out. And do you have resources to do that, or do you just need to flip everything to one and only and then just go after that? And then if that fails, then now you're pivoting to the next one. But I would say it's very much a resource management kind of strategy for us. Hopefully that helps.
I have a question. Oh, sorry.
Well, one quick question here from our online crowd here. She asked, do you think that independent creatives in film and music can truly compete with the resources of Hollywood studios or major labels, or do you eventually have to access the system to truly scale?
I think they can compete. I think independent for sure can compete, especially because they can recognize niches that Hollywood is not willing to serve. So anytime they're chasing something with a $100 million budget, $150 million, whatever it is, there's only so much risk that they can take on with that. But if you're willing to go after certain niches, then you can succeed there, and that can grow over time, right? And also, I mean, everyone is walking around right now with a movie studio in your pocket. Everyone. So the barrier to entry is now essentially zero to start out, at least to develop the skill set. We all have the ability to shoot, to write, to edit, to publish, to distribute. It's all right here, and it's free, and there's no excuse for it, right? For not doing it. So if you want to develop the skill set, when creatives start out, their tastes outpace their skill set by a long shot. Oh, I really love Christopher Nolan movies. Oh, Steven Spielberg, he's a genius, and all these things. Yes, and yes, all that. And just because you can see how awesome what he's doing is, doesn't mean you doing it and getting there is that easy, right? And so you need to get in the reps. And so much of that really has to do with just being willing to put out a lot of garbage. Most of the stuff I look back on from my Orabrush days, and even some of the stuff in the early days of Harmon Brothers, is cringy to me at this point. It just is. And that is the price you pay to get good at your craft. It's just what happens. So embrace that. Just go start making stuff. Go start failing. Go start putting it out there. Start getting feedback. And I think that is how, because you can pivot quicker than Disney, than Warner Brothers, than Universal, than all those. Yes, the independent, there is a place for the independent. It's not going to be everybody that breaks through, but you can carve out a nice niche for yourself and have some success.
I had a question here in the back. Hi.
Yes.
Hi. So when you were talking earlier about how you had to make, you didn't have your model quite in place in
Yep.
order for to kind of stick the clients.
Yep.
what adjustments or
Did
pieces,
we make?
yeah, in order to start sticking those clients?
Yep. So early on, we tried to kind of go a little bit more a la carte with our pricing. So we would be like, oh, it's going to be this much to do this thing, to do this at the production. It's going to be this much to write. And it's not that there's not a place for that. It's just we've found with campaigns, a lot of times a CMO or a CEO wants to make one decision and just turn it over. So if you can get them to bite off on the entire budget and cushion yourself enough to do great work, so you're not just like, oh my gosh, I'm bleeding out all my profits. That was one of our early learnings, is like, okay, let's just price it well enough that we know we can confidently deliver for them, and that we can iterate and do enough fixes and things on it that we know we can succeed for them, and then they don't have to be sitting there thinking, oh, it's going to be another $5,000 for this. It's going to be another $10,000. Like, let's just not do that. Let's just price it once, bite off on the package. You're either in or you're out, and then they don't have to be constantly making decisions over and over again. It was just too much. It was too much friction for the chief marketing officers and CEOs and stuff that we were making decisions with. And so that was one of the things early on that we learned. And I'm not saying that you can't actually do a la carte things. You can. Just for us, that was one of the things. Pivots, we needed to learn to kind of find our stride.
There's another one here online. It says, from Michael, how would you describe your mindset during the creation and building of your advertising agency?
Our mindset? Feed our families. That was it. Like we've always said that we only want to sell things that we believe in, and then we've said it unless our families are starving, in which case we'll do almost anything. It's not anything, but what your standard is of what you believe in can change a little bit. It's like, oh, am I going to sell these pants that are the same as all these other pants brands? Well, someone needs to sell pants. I guess I can go sell pants. There's nothing maybe that differentiated about them, but someone needs to sell pants and buy pants somewhere. And it can be that kind of a thing where that you just kind of have to close a deal and get going to survive. That was a little bit of our mindset. And then also, I mean, for us, it was always about what kind of ads do we want to make? That was our thing. I've been a consumer for a long time of really bad ads and really good ads. And I can remember clear back to my childhood days of watching Monday Night Football, because our family didn't watch football on Sundays. And I could remember my mom not pausing the TV, but like turning off the TV during the commercial breaks. So we would go and like clean the living room. And I was so mad because I wanted to watch the Bud Light ads because they were amazing. But anyway, and I didn't even drink beer. So, but I loved really good advertising, even from the time I was a young kid, and was quoting it, and really good filmmaking and that kind of thing. And so, we've just always been really excited to make content that we would enjoy consuming ourselves. Go ahead.
What are the habits that you would suggest for a young college student like me that you've developed in your life that have helped you achieve success?
Habits that help achieve success. I would say embrace embarrassment. If you can, the sooner you can kind of get over yourself of the stuff that you're creating and the things that you're doing, and get feedback from people that are going to give you real, candid truth bombs that are going to hurt and embarrass you and turn you red in the face, the faster you're going to learn. So that's one of the reasons stand-up comedians are so good. Stand-up comedians and entrepreneurs have a lot in common. They are willing to go out there and test something, and they're willing to fall flat on their face for it, just knowing that that's part of the process of learning. And I have way too much perfectionism in myself, even more than I like to this day, of that kind of thing of like, oh, but what if it's bad? And it's like, of course it's going to be bad before it's good. Every single time we've gone out and shot a campaign, we sit down in the editing room, at least in the early days, this is the case, and you watch the first edit, and you literally feel physically sick. And you're like, well, we wasted a lot of money there. and then you go and rescue it, But that was the process we had to go through to create really good content, is just every single time. I mean, even Martin Scorsese would say that he said, if you haven't, got to your first edit and you don't feel physically ill about it, you've done something wrong. It means maybe you haven't tried hard enough or something. But that is the process. Is that my phone? No, it's somebody else's. Okay, shut it down. No, but I would say the sooner you can get to testing your ideas out on people and having those be rejected, the faster you get feedback. Because it works for you, but doesn't work for everybody else. So embrace the embarrassment and embrace the process of learning.
Thank you so much, Daniel. We appreciate your time. Is there one more? We'll do one more question.
Okay. Sorry. I was just wondering from like a startup business standpoint, when you felt like it was worth to outsource some of your processes of your business, because I feel like there are a lot of companies now that you can outsource your HR, you can outsource your payroll, or any variety of things, or did you feel like it was better to keep it close to home and to handle everything in-house?
Okay, I'll say it from the perspective of a creative, because I admittedly, I was chief creative officer, I was not CEO or COO. From a creative standpoint, outsourcing makes the most sense. The first job you want to replace yourself on is editing. So you want to outsource editing work. That's once you've already, you just can't do it yourself, but that is hiring an editor is one of the first things that you want to do, because you can kind of film yourself and stuff, but an editor can really bring a lot of that timing and rhythm and things that maybe you haven't learned to do yet. On more of an operational side of things, I mean, we had finances in-house largely, and we had most of our stuff in-house, but production teams for us was something that we'd go outside, and we still do, where we still sometimes hire outside producers, outside directors of photography, because we're just not necessarily filming every single day. And the same thing, we go out of house for writers and stuff. We have a couple of in-house writers that are full-time, but they're all Swiss Army knives, meaning they know how to write, they know how to direct, or they know how to edit, or they know how to do something else. And everybody at Harmon Brothers has a little bit of that Swiss Army knife feel, which is good. There's very few that are actually just specialized and do only one thing. To survive at Harmon Brothers, you have to be able to dabble in a lot of stuff. There's a little bit of that kind of entrepreneur sort of backbone to it. But that's really nice, because when things really spool up in one area and there becomes a lot of demand, you can step back and be like, oh, I can produce on this, or I can direct on that, I can edit on that, or I can be script supervisor, or whatever it is. Or when it slows down, and then you can focus in on the one thing that you do, or maybe there's another need over there and you're like, you know what, I'm not going to edit for a while, I'm just going to write, or I'm just going to produce, or I'm just going to sweep floors, or whatever it is. But everyone at Harmon Brothers is a Swiss Army knife.
Amazing. Thank you so much. Thank you for your time and your wisdom. We really, really appreciate it. Please give one last thank you to Daniel Harmon.
Thanks.